Beatrice and Ziane couldn't believe they were actually sneaking in to Gig Elementary School, a school where they were hired to teach. They were going in the side window. The children had opened the window so they can get in, and the parents were there helping them climb in. The children were quite thrilled to see their teachers doing this, but they knew it was serious as well. They got into the school, took off their coats and shook off the snow, and the children cheered. But then the teachers, Beatrice and Ziane Delage, said, "Time for lessons." And that's what they did. Now, why did these two women, these two sisters, have to sneak into the school? Well, it's because there were police out front waiting for them. And what crime could they have committed? Trespassing. But their real crime was because they were teaching both French and English at this French elementary school. They were given lessons in both languages so that the children learned both the French and the English. They could read and write in both languages. But the school board, the provincial government, back in 1912, declared that no one could give lessons to the children in French after grade 2. They were only allowed 1 hour of lessons in French. "That's crazy," said the sisters. "We've always taught both in French and in English. Gig Elementary School is in Lower Town on Murray Street, and Ottawa at the time, and even now, was very bilingual." This was 1915, and the sisters did know that this was against the law to teach in both French and English, but they disregarded it. Many of the teachers disregarded it. Some of the teachers would hide their French books when the inspectors came by. And other schools, the parents said to the children, "If the inspector comes, get up and leave." Then they can't interview the children to see what lessons they're taking and in what language. But the Delage sisters stood their ground. "We will teach the children in both French and English and disregard the rules." The school board was paying a special attention to these women. Gig Elementary School was the biggest and the most prestigious school in Ontario. The sisters were told, "You must obey, and if you don't, we'll cut your pay." Well, they said, "Fine, cut." And every day they came back and taught, even though they weren't being paid. Then they told them, "If you don't stop, we'll take away your license. And that way you won't be able to teach anywhere in Ontario, let alone here in Ottawa." The women said fine, and they continued to teach. And finally the school board said, "That's it. You are trespassing. You cannot come into this school to teach." Well, the sisters were not deterred at all. They went to a local chapel nearby and got the room to give the lessons at the chapel. All the children that they taught showed up at the chapel. And the school board hired 2 new teachers, 2 English teachers, to go to Gig Elementary School to give the lessons. When they showed up, there were no children to be seen. The children and their parents had escorted them to the chapel. Then a businessman on Dalhousie Street, Dalhousie and Gig, said that they could use a warehouse he had. They could use it for free. And so the children moved there, and they set up like a classroom, and the lessons were given there. That was October, but in December it was getting very cold, and the building wasn't really heated for this type of activity. The parents were getting fed up, and they said, "That's it. Come January, the kids are going back to the school." And the Delage sisters said, "So are we." Well, when the school board heard that, how dare they say they're going back to that school? And that's when they decided to have the police waiting for them should they try to trespass. The women, of course, were already in the school. Out front was the president of the school board. He was waiting there with 30 police officers. 30! And there were no Delage sisters, for they were already inside. When the superintendent heard that, he told those police, "Get in there and get those women out." But the mothers all sat on the stairs. There are 2 staircases going up to the front door of the school, and they sat on those stairs to block the police. They sat down with their long dresses wrapped around their legs. They linked arms, and some removed their hats, their broad hats, their hats with hat pins. The hat pins were there to hold the hat to their hair. Women had long hair, and they would pile it up, and they used the pins to hold the hat to the hair. The larger the hat, the longer the pins. And they sat there and waited. And as the police tried to step between them, as the police pushed their hands on the ladies' heads, those ladies took those pins and stabbed the police. They stabbed them in the legs. They stabbed them in the arms. They stabbed them wherever they can to get them off those steps. And the police did. They were screaming in pain. Blood was trickling down their legs, down their arms. They backed up. And when they turned around, who did they see? More women. More women holding hat pins, ready for battle. And the battle ensued. Those women attacked the police. People were picking up bits of ice off the sidewalk and throwing at the police. The police finally backed down, and the superintendent advised them to leave. No one was arrested. He then asked the parents to go into the school to see the Delige sisters. And the superintendent, he went in and he begged them, "Please be reasonable. This is an Ontario law. This was created to help you provide a better education for these children." They didn't think that these ladies or other teachers had the proper French training to teach the children French. But the true reason for that rule was to assimilate the English into the French population. The French were to stop speaking French. They were to stop their customs. They were to stop their religion. Everything was to be Anglo-Unitarian Protestant. They were okay with the French coming into Ontario, but Ontario was English only. And this was one more way for them to get the French to bow and be Anglophones. Well, the Eastern Ontario, a lot of French communities, some of them, 90% of the community was French, so they had a strong voice. They protected the Delige sisters every day. The women walked them to school, carrying their hat pins in defiance of the law. Well, they also protested to City Hall. They protested to Parliament Hill. All the French schools, all the Francophones in the region started protesting, loud voices, marching to Parliament Hill, and in different towns, marching to their city halls. They would not be silenced. The French newspaper, Le Droit, was started because of Regulation 17 to fight against this horrible regulation, such discrimination against the French people. The regulation, well, it didn't affect this region because they had a strong voice. But think of it, Southern Ontario, Northern Ontario, and even in the West. The little communities there were awash with English community. They worked in English, all their entertainment was in English. And soon, whole generations of Francophones lost their language, lost their ability to read and write, and eventually lost their ability to even speak in French. Well, they protested loud and clear, and it took almost 10 years for the government to stop implementing the regulation. It took another 20 years before they cut it from the rules and regulations. But the Francophones in Ottawa, the Francophones in Lower Town, they fought for their rights and they won. Now, you might think hat pins as a weapon. This was not the first time that a hat pin was used to fight off the police. You know, in New York City, 1906, The women, the factory workers, came out in droves, removed their hat pins, and attacked the police, who were trying to arrest some ladies who were giving speeches. Anarchistic speeches, the police said. More than likely, they were asking for the vote. Hat pins were also used by young women to defend themselves. In this era, women were now going out and working. A lot of the men were off at war. The women would carry their hat pins, and they would have to take public transportation and walk to work. The men saw them as easy targets and would sidle up next to them and sit beside them on the trams. The women would take out their hat pins and stab them until the man left. The men saw it as a hat pin peril. The police forced to arrest women carrying hat pins longer than 9 inches long. 60 women in Australia went to jail before they gave up their hat pins. Well, if the men behaved, the women wouldn't need their hat pins as defense. Eventually, the hat pin peril went by the way. The hats, those big, beautiful hats, the fashion changed. Women cut their hair and then wore clutches. So there was no need for a hat pin. But from that time on, the hat pin was a symbol of the perseverance of the Francophone community here in Ottawa. Here and in the rest of Ontario, it is a symbol of defiance for the hat pin rebellion.